Rolling here with the webinar is first of a two-part series called Unleashing the Power of AppLocker, How to Get Started and Go Beyond the Basics with Oddvar Mo. Let me tell you a little bit about TrustedSec. We are what we call best-in-class consultants, and so we have several different areas that we help organizations as a full-service consulting firm. We, of course, do penetration testing. Purple teams are getting a tremendous amount of advancement right now, a lot of interest. Business risk assessments have really rocketed back, along with PCI, continues to be a hot subject. We work on program building, working on attestations for third parties, and that's really been huge and will continue to be so going forward here. One of the newer services last year we started was remediation, and that's really helped a lot of organizations that have particular, usually short-term issues that they're looking to get help on, some expertise, some implementation guidance, things like that. And then also, as always, incident response whenever anything goes wrong. But threat hunting actually is a service that we've picked up recently and really continue to see a lot of interest in that. TrustedSec brings a process-oriented approach. So really when we look at it holistically, we're trying to help you build the program, which is always an ongoing issue, how to test it, and what we're typically known for, how to fix it, as I said, with remediation, and then if anything goes wrong, how to respond. So really looking at that full life cycle of helping you build your security program. So a little bit on how TrustedSec is different. What's really interesting about TrustedSec and the way that it was built up by Dave Kennedy is our engagements are led by senior level consultants. So whereas most organizations have one or two experts and a lot of junior consultants, really TrustedSec has flipped that model and really have brought forth really the leaders in industry from all over the world, as we're witnessing here. And we are also the ones that create a tremendous amount of tools to help the industry out. We're always trying to give back and help organizations do more, even if they are competitors, but we're always looking to continue to push that environment and push security for the better. And one of the really important things that we've learned over the last 3 years is the value of a dedicated attack research team. So we have a full team of people that all they do is focused on how best to get attacks, the latest and greatest technologies, what people are doing. And we use that and we pull that through our entire organization because things have gotten so complicated and it's so difficult for most organizations to keep up. They really need that best level penetration testing, assessments, purple teams, et cetera, red teams, to build that in and make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. And we're lucky enough to have one of those research team members here with us today, Oddvar Mo. Once again, just real quick, before I turn it over to Oddvar, we're recording this. Please feel free to answer a question or ask questions, and we'll look to answer them along the way or at the end if we can't get to them. And then also, we will be talking about the next part 2 that we'll be doing in a couple of weeks. Oddvar?
Thank you, Steve. So, welcome everybody. My name, as you can see, is Oddvar Mo. So I work as a senior security consultant. I do mostly red teaming, but I also do a lot of security research. Before I started working with security, I worked a lot of years as a Microsoft infrastructure consultant. So I did a lot of different things, setting up Active Directory, deploying group policies, hardening environments for the better. But now I work as a pen tester. So I do pen test, I do red teaming, I do research. I also do a lot of public speaking as much as I can. And I also contribute as much as I can on Twitter and blogs and stuff. And as a result of that, Microsoft has awarded me the Microsoft MVP award for the 4th time. So that's really cool. All right, so let's talk about AppLocker. So this is part 1 of 2 parts. And this first part, we will just cover a little bit about the basics, like how to get started. I'm going to talk a little bit about what AppLocker is and what it's not. just to clear that up. I'm also gonna go through how to set it up, like how to create the policies, how do we use like set it up in audit mode so we can easily deploy this in a pilot project, how to set up event forwarding, and last but not least, try to enforce rules so we actually block stuff that we don't want to execute on our endpoints. So hopefully that will be interesting. So this is part one. Part two, I will go in more depth in terms of more specific hardening of AppLocker, because there are AppLocker is not bulletproof, so there's a lot of things you need to harden in order for it to become as good as it can. I will also go over how to find weaknesses, what you typically look for. I have some tools already published that you can use to help you in finding or discovering weaknesses. Cool. So first off, what is AppLocker? So AppLocker is one of Microsoft's whitelisting solutions. They have also something previously called device guard. It's called application control. That's another one. That's like even better than AppLocker, but it's even more difficult to implement and maintain over time. So it hasn't been embraced that much yet. So AppLocker is an easy way to get started with application whitelisting, and it's not perfect, but it's in most cases good enough to stop a very vast amount of automated attacks and even stop advanced attackers, because it makes it more difficult to execute binaries on the endpoint. If you have previous experience with something called software restriction policies, these were really hot back in Windows Server 2003, the XP era. This is AppLocker is considered the version 2 of software restriction policy. So this is like the newest and greatest in terms of that. AppLocker, however, requires you to have an enterprise or an education license on the endpoint for it to work. If you configure everything correctly, you set it up, and it doesn't work, and you start to troubleshoot, you will often end up in a case where you're looking at the event log, and it says that you have the wrong SKU. And that means you do not have the enterprise or the education SKU on your endpoint, and therefore AppLocker will not work. So that's an important thing. AppLocker is not meant as like a security boundary. So it's more part of the defense in depth strategy for Microsoft, where this is a part of a vast amount of different products and solutions for Microsoft. And how it works under the hood is that you basically do not, by default, it denies everything from executing, and then you allow certain things to run, and that's how you whitelist. You specify what sort of paths are binaries allowed to execute from, or you can specify like a publisher, like for instance, let's say Microsoft or Apple or whatever, or you can even specify the hash of a file. So you can like whitelist hashes or publishers or paths. So I'll cover that more in detail when we go into the demo mode, so you can get a clearer picture. Okay, so AppLocker, what it is not, as I told you, it's not a security boundary. And if you look at the official Microsoft homepage, it will clearly state that this is something they don't consider something they want to service. So if you find something like a bypass or something, this is not something you will get a CVE for. This is something they don't want to service. It's something they don't patch, basically. So that's important to know, that it's not considered a security boundary. Also, it's not designed to protect admins. So if you have a lot of computers and you have your end users being local administrators, AppLocker is probably not the thing you need to deploy. If that's the case, then I would probably focus more on removing rights first before I would deploy AppLocker. Because as an admin, it's fairly simple to just disable AppLocker. There are reference to 2 blog posts there that I've written, just 2 different methods. So yeah, just So you know it's not that hard for an user to bypass it or stop it when you're an admin. Okay. In AppLocker, we have different methods of setting it up. The one I prefer and the one I'm going to talk about today is the default rules. That's basically where you just use the default that Microsoft offers. Another approach is to create publisher rules, and that works great for a certain amount of time. So what you basically do is that you take like the biggest companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, and you whitelist their certs. And that will work for a while until you realize that not all files are signed. And then you end up with creating a lot of exceptions to that rule, and you end up with a pretty nasty rule set. And yeah, I wouldn't go down that road. I've been down that road and it's not fun. You also have another approach. Inside the GUI, you can let Windows scan the entire disk of a system and figure out the rules it needs to implement. I call this the chaos approach because when you do that and you scan a single system, you end up with like 100 different rules in a great mix of hash, signatures, paths, and they often overlap. So it's something I don't recommend that you do, but it's good to know that it's there. If you are starting out with AppLocker for the first time, I would strongly recommend that you look at a solution called AppLocker. This is a scripted approach. It makes it way simpler to maintain over time, because what you basically do is that you deploy a computer with all the software you need, and then you run a script and it generates a rule set for you, and then you import that into group policy and deploy it. And that script is so good written that it handles all the exceptions and all the things you need. So if you're starting out, AppLocker is probably the way to go. Right. When I have deployed AppLocker, I would say at a fair amount of customers, my recommendation is to start out with a pilot project. What I normally tell my customers to do is to pick out like just a few computers to start with. Of course, just like take the IT department or something first, because they are tech savvy. Let them try out the rules first, and then you pick out like 10 to 8% of a mix of your machines in your environment, and then you normally create the rules you want and set it to audit only. That way you can gather events from the computers. If you're good enough mix, you will get like inputs from everyone, and you will start to see what sort of exceptions you need to make, and then you can add all the rules you need, and then run this new rule set you have tweaked for a few weeks, and then you can switch to enforce on those 2 to 8% of your machines. And when you do that, you will probably end up finding that someone needs an exceptions, and the rule of thumb there is if let's say you discover that someone in accounting needs an exception, please use the groups functionality in AppLocker, because you don't want an exception for every single computer. You maybe just want an exception for like 5 people. Then you create a group and you add those machines or users in that group, and then they get the exceptions and not everyone. When you feel comfortable, you could increase the amount of computers and continue with the rate you want until you are at full scale. All right. In terms of, I talked highly of the default rules. The default rules are basically these 3 guys here. So when you create the default rules, it creates a rule for everyone that allows them to run files located under program files folder. And everyone is allowed to run everything under the Windows folder. And the administrators are allowed to run everything on the system. And if you think of this as in terms of the user not having admin rights, this makes sense, because in order for you to add something to the program files folder or the Windows folder, you need to be a local admin. So the idea here is that an admin, if a user has a program they need to run, an admin should log on and install that software so it ends up in the program files, and then the administrator logs off and the user logs back on, and the program is allowed to run. That's the main idea behind the default rule set, and it's pretty good. But there are in part 2 of the webinar, we're going to cover some exceptions to those rules, because there are a couple of folders under, especially the Windows folder, that the users actually are allowed to write to. So that's a problem when it comes to AppLocker. In terms of logging, these are the event codes you need to be aware of. You have the general ones, 8000, 8001, 8007. And if you have the wrong version of Windows, you will often end up finding event 8007. That means that you have the wrong version. You don't have enterprise, or you don't have education. And then there are different levels for the different ones. So in terms of if an executable is allowed to run, you will get an 8002 for .exe files or .dll files. For scripts or MSI files, it's 8005. If you have audit mode enabled, you will see 8003 every time something is run but would have been blocked if the policy were set to enforced. If you are enforcing rules, you will see an 8004 every time something is blocked or denied from running. And this is interesting. So especially if like a pen tester is trying to get something to run, you will often see 8004 or 8007 error messages. And then you can see the paths, and you can even create automations that can pull out the files they're trying to run to a central server if you want to. All right. So let's switch over to the lab and walk you through some basics. All right. So feel free to ask questions along the way. I have a question, the questions open next to me, so I can see when you type. First off, this is a domain controller. I have a domain controller, and I have a normal Windows client logged in as a normal user. Not this user, but a normal user. Okay, so first off, we're going to prepare the environment a little. So first, in Active Directory users and computers, we want to first create an organizational unit that we will use as a base for this entire walkthrough. So I'll just quickly create an organizational unit. Let's call that trusted sec. And then we can create a sub-organizational unit called computers. And I will just move PC2, that's the PC we are working against in this exercise. So I'm just moving that down to this organizational unit. Okay, and then in order for us to get started, we need to create something called a group policy. And the way we do that is that we start the group policy management console. And let me just refresh this quick. And then we can go into the organizational units we just created. And we basically just right-click and select create a GPO in this domain and link it here. This will create a new group policy object that is empty. So we'll call this webinar AppLocker policy. All right. So as you can see, this is empty. So we will right-click and choose edit. And in this window, we can actually set stuff that will be enforced on the computers. In this case, just PC2. So for us to set AppLocker policies, we need to move under or navigate under policies, Windows settings, security settings, application control policies. This is where you live when you work with the AppLocker. So here are the different, we call them sections when we talk about AppLocker. We have the executable rule sections, we have the Windows installer section, and so on and so forth. So what I normally do when I start out is that I just right-click each section and create default rules. That will create the rules I just showed you in the PowerPoint. Automatically generate rules. You don't want to use that. That's the chaos approach. Create new rule. We create just a rule that you can specify manually. We'll do that a little later on. So start off by creating the default rules in each section. I'll just do that real quick, like this. And it's important to know that there's a small issue with especially modern Windows 7 and later. In those versions of Windows, the start menu is a modern app. It's part of the shell experience host. So if you don't create this rule right here or have a rule in the package app rules, you will actually break the start menu. So it's important to always include this rule right here. All right. And then there's one thing missing in this list, and that is DLLs. And an important thing to know is that when working with AppLocker, you want to make sure that you include DLLs as well, because basically an executable and a DLL is almost the same. It's a way of getting code to execute. So you want to include that as well. So the way you do that is that you right-click AppLocker, go into Properties, and then you go to the Advanced tab. And here's a place where you can actually turn this on. You can safely ignore the warning where it says that it can really affect performance. That's not true. There has been some edge cases where that has been the case, but that's normally due to bad software that constantly like hammers DLL files for some reason. Click Apply, and then we exit out, and then we create the same default rules on DLL rules as well. So now all the rules are in place. The next thing we need to do is that we need to choose whether or not we want to enforce or audit the different sections. So I was thinking that we would start by just doing an audit. So I'll just click that on for each section, like this. So I can safely deploy this rule set now to all the computers in the domain if I want to, because it doesn't actually affect anything. But I would strongly recommend that you do this in a controlled environment first, a small pilot group, just to be sure. And also there's one more thing that you need to be aware of in terms of AppLocker. It's not enough to just have a group policy being applied with the rules. There's also a service in Windows that needs to be started. And this is like, I don't know, troubleshooting 101. This is normally the first thing people tend to forget when they're working with AppLocker. They deploy everything, they even see like the group policy is applied, but nothing is blocked or audited at all. So what you normally do is that you go into, or what I do in the AppLocker group policy I create, I go on the system services, and here I go on the application identity, and then I just turn this on. You can also harden this service a bit more if you want to. I'm not going to do that in this webinar, but that's also something you need to look into if you're deploying this. Click OK, and now we're good to go. So let's switch over to our client. And as with everything in Windows, we need to do a GP update to make things speed up a bit. And if you want to watch the progress with AppLocker, you can go into the System32 folder. There's an AppLocker folder, and this folder will eventually be filled up with different one file for each section. That means this happens when the application identity service has picked up the rules, and it has it has run through them and sees that every rule is in order for it to use it. So here will suddenly, if we wait a little, it will pop up a few rules in the list there. If it doesn't happen within 30 seconds, I normally just boot it to make it faster. Especially when we're doing a webinar, this would be probably a good time to have a lame joke or something. Any questions so far while we wait? No questions? Will that background be available? That's Dave Kennedy in that Superman image. Yes, that background image could possibly be made available if you pay me enough. I'm just kidding. I guess we could. I need to ask Dave for his permission though. Let's see. I'm just looking through the questions here. Yeah, while I look through, I'll just reboot the computer because this is taking too much time. That normally helps. Let's see. Let me go to the top here. The recording will be available afterwards. I will not talk about WDAC today. I can do that in another webinar if you want. The slides, we can post the slides, no problem. Yeah, okay, Stephen already answered that, of course. So why deploy AppLocker if it's not a security boundary, but Microsoft Defender application control is? Yeah, so as I said, AppLocker is part of the defense in depth strategy. So if you try to deploy WDAC, at least in my opinion, I think it's much harder to deploy and harder to maintain. So I think it's easier to get started with AppLocker. And again, I would rather have something that works and it's easy to manage than have nothing at all. That's at least my opinion. Let me just quickly log in here. Normal user. Let's see. Yeah, you're probably right. They didn't have modern apps back in Windows 7. It was my bad. They started in Windows 8, right? Yes. And there's a question here. Any info about how Intune won't support AppLocker? So, okay, there are an exception to this SKU rule I told you about. If I said that you needed enterprise or education SKU for it to work, there is an exception in terms of Intune where you can use modern management to deploy AppLocker. In that case, you can actually use the Pro version, but it's a totally different scenario because I haven't deployed it myself, but the guides I've seen is that you need to export XML files and you need to import them into the Intune portal and deploy it that way. So it's kind of different approach. Would you apply AppLocker to workstation only or to servers as well? I would definitely do it on remote desktop servers as well. Definitely. If this is something the users are using, I would harden it as much as possible, and I would definitely use AppLocker for that. All right, let's see now if the files are present or not. Windows System 32, AppLocker. Okay, so the files are here now, so that's a good thing. So now it should basically start auditing. So let's just verify that by just executing order runs like this. And then we can go into the event viewer and verify that it actually is listed. So if everything checks out now, this file is located on my desktop, so it's not part of the default rules, meaning that since we are in audit mode, it should warn me that this file would normally get blocked if we were to enforce the rules. So let's verify that. And the place you go to check AppLocker event logs is under the application and services log. When it's not hanging, there we go. Under Microsoft, Windows, AppLocker. And here are the different sections. So XC and DLLs are combined, MSI and scripts are combined, and then you have package app deployment and package app execution. So this was an XC file, so I'll just go into the XC section. Then I'll browse, and hopefully we'll see a yellow one. There we go. This was this is something else. This is Windows Defender. I'll talk about that a little later, but there's Windows Defender changed the path for their binaries at some point. So there's like an own there's a knowledge base article written about that specifically. I'll cover that later. Let's see. There we go. So this is a normal audit policy where it says that the file orderruns.exe was allowed to run, but would have been prevented if we were to enforce the rules. So this is something you want to collect centrally. If you have Splunk, then you would of course just use the Splunk agent to collect this. If you don't have that, I would consider using event forwarding. Okay, the way we do event forwarding, I'll show that as well, is that we start off by setting up a server to sorry, I lost my words here. Set up the server to collect the logs. So the way we do this, I'm just using my domain controller, but normally you would use a dedicated server for this. So start up the event viewer quick. Oh, I skipped a step because I've done it before. Sorry. So the first step on enabling this on the server is to run WinRM QC, quick configuration. This is already run. What it basically does is start the WinRM service, and that's basically it. And then you go into the subscription, and normally you get a question here if you want to enable the service or not, and you need to answer yes. So that's the first two steps. And then you need to create a group policy so you can push out information to the clients where they are supposed to send the logs. So we'll do that as well. So we'll create a new group policy called webinar forwarding, just call it like this. Then we go into edit mode. And then we go in under policies, admin templates, Windows components. Let's see, event forwarding right here. And then we configure target subscription manager. Set it to enabled, go into show, and then we need to paste a special line of code. I'm lazy, so I'm just copy pasting from another screen. But you need to specify server, and then you need to specify a path to the service, the VS-man service. Refresh every 60 seconds. Okay, that's the first part. And then you need to go into, let's see, Windows. Let me just make it bigger. The Windows components, and then the event log service. And then the security, I think. Yeah, then you need to configure log access. And then there's a special string you need to have for it to set the correct permissions. I have included a link in the PowerPoint that has a really detailed guide on how to figure out all this stuff, including this line here. But it's basically setting the correct rights for it to be able to collect the logs. All right, and the last step is to go into, we need to start a service, so we need to go into security settings. Right here, system services, Windows remote management. There we go, and just set this to automatic. And that's it. And then another step on the domain controller is to set up a subscription. That's the last thing we need to do. So we create a subscription, just call this AppLocker. And then do a source computer initiated. and then we add, you could either do a group, that's probably the way you want to go, like a pilot group or whatever. In my case, I'm just using domain, not users, but computers. That's fine. And then you can select the events. So here you can specify what you actually want to get. I don't want to get all the logs. I'm just interested in the AppLocker logs. So I'll just check that out like this. And that's it. Okay. So now everything is configured. Just give it a second. There we go. So under normal operations, you would probably need to wait a little bit for it to pop up in the forward events under the Windows logs. So we're gonna do a GP update force again, just to make it go a little faster. So I'll just switch back to the client real quick. Do a GP update force. And this is also really great if you want to monitor stuff, not only AppLocker, but also other Windows related stuff. If you want to centralize your logging and you cannot afford Splunk, or you don't have enough competency to set up Kibana or whatever, this is like a poor man's SIM. It's better than nothing, at least. All right, so hopefully now we should see events popping up here. And there we go. So from now on, if I go into PC2 again and try to run a binary, let's close this down like this. It should hopefully end up here within the next minute or so. That's normally what happens. The awkward silence. While we wait, I can look a quick at the questions. Let's see. Is AppLocker applied? Okay, is AppLocker applied to Windows 10 Pro OSs, but can only be managed from Win 10 Enterprise? The MS website is a bit vague. Seems that you can apply to Win 8, Win 7. So why not? Oh, so if the documentation is a bit vague, I know for a fact that on Windows 7, I haven't deployed this on Windows 8, but on Windows 7 you need Enterprise as well. That's 100% sure. You cannot deploy a group policy managed AppLocker to a Windows 10 Pro. That's not possible. For you to deploy it to Windows 10 Pro, you need to deploy this through Intune or Modern Management. Okay. Agree with the VDAC point. It does create code integrity logs with the path of building policy, but they can be painful. Yeah. So my point there was that, like in a normal day-to-day, you probably will end up with a user saying, I need to have an exception for this meeting application. Can you help me real quick? And that's something you can actually do with AppLocker, but it's you can of course do it with code integrity or VDAC as well, but it's much harder. Because nothing makes leave. Okay. Docs. Yeah, there's link to the docs. How fragile are the rule sets when patches and new software are deployed? It depends on how you build the rules. If you build around, for instance, hashes, those are really fragile, because if you patch a binary, it changes its hash value, and therefore the rules will not apply anymore. So yeah, there are considerations to think of when you're creating rules, of course. Right, let's switch back to the walkthrough. So this is, of course, stopped for some reason. Let's see if we probably need to run this one more time. Oh, there we go. There's an error message. Shell experience host. Okay. I'm not sure what happened now, but normally you would see the logs getting in. I know I tested this morning, so it should work. I don't know why. Let's continue, and we can circle back in the end and see if it's if the logs are filling up. All right, let's go back to the domain controller, and let's change the policy to actually enforce the AppLocker policies, just so you can see how that works. So I'll change every section to enforce, like this. So now, if I haven't whitelisted something, it will get blocked. So if someone tries to execute a file from documents or desktop or whatever, it should get blocked. Of course, not immediately, because this is group policy, so it needs to be updated every 90 minutes and so. But we can, of course, again force it with GP update, and then we can look at the AppLocker files real quick. See the latest timestamp. That's a way to troubleshoot. I see that they just updated this minute, so that means they're probably good to go. So let's go to the desktop and try to execute a binary. And yeah, it's blocked. So if I try to run, let's say I try to run the script here, that's blocked as well. So there are different error messages. If you try to run stuff from the command prompt, you will see a different error. Let's do the script. You see, this program is blocked by group policy. The same if I run other ones, this program is blocked by group policy. It doesn't say AppLocker, but that's basically what's happening. In the event log, we should see errors instead. And as you can see, this file has been prevented from running. All right. So let's say we want to allow the Microsoft sysinternals tool to run. How do we do that? How do we maintain that? Let's do that. So switching back to the domain controller, I'm going into the executable rules, and I want to create a publisher rule because I want to whitelist that publisher. So the way we do that is that we right-click, create new rule, and then you can select allow or you can select deny. Normally you do allow when you follow the default rules principle. And then you do next, and then you can choose the different rules or conditions for the rules you want. So in this case, I know that the file we want to whitelist is digitally signed. So I'm going to choose a publisher. I could choose path, but those are normally if you whitelist a path that is writable to a user, that's normally not a good idea because they can just place random files there and execute them. File hash is like the next best. The best is publisher, the next best is file hash, and the last resort is a path. With a file hash, it calculates the hash of the file, so it's kind of hard to fake it. So let's go with the publisher, and then you can choose a reference file. So do you browse to a file? In this case, it's the sysinternals tools. So I have placed it on the desktop on the DC already. This is the same file. And then you can choose what you want to whitelist on. You can, for instance, just whitelist any digitally signed file if you want. That's not a good idea. That means that I can just buy a certificate and I can sign a file and I can run it. Back in the days, like when our AppLocker started, if you created this rule, you would actually block like almost every instance of malware out there because nobody signed their malware. So this was actually a really, really good rule back in the days. But what we want to do now is that we want to only let's allow the publisher. That's basically allowing everything from Microsoft. Let's do that. Next, create. So hopefully now, when I go back to the computer and I do a GP update again, it should be allowed to run. Oh, timestamp updated, perfect. So if I try to run this should still be blocked because it's not signed. It's a script I created. Yeah, blocked. The other ones should be executed, as well as the AD Explorer as well, because that's also signed by Microsoft. Yep, perfect. So that works. So one last thing I want to show, or there are two more things I want to show, is that when you start to create a lot of rules, there are things I would strongly recommend that you start doing when you start out. That's actually creating a good structure on the group policies. So I have a pre-created one here just to show you. This is just an example. You basically, the way AppLocker works is that it combines the different AppLocker rules it finds in all the different group policies, and then it combines it to one XML, and then it applies it to the client. So that means you can basically split it up. So what I normally do, I create one for the default rules. This is an approved version, of course. I have some exceptions and some stuff. And then I create one GPO for each different section with block rules. And also I create one new group policy for each section with allow rules. So that way it's more easier to manage, because like, oh, I want to add another block rule for DLLs based on path. I can just go into this group policy. Then I can just browse into it. Application control, AppLocker, DLL files or rules. And that's the only rules that are present. So I know that there are only path rules here, and it's for DLL files only. If I go into the other sections, there's nothing. Because that's the problem when you have too many rules. You have a combination of allow rules, deny rules, path rules, publisher rules, etc. It becomes like really difficult to handle when it becomes really, really big. So that's just a recommendation from me. And it's easier to start out this way than implement it later on. All right, let's see. So let's say we want to create an exception. Let's say you deploy this in enforce mode, and accounting calls and says that, hey, we cannot run our beloved program that is located in C:" something something. So the way you handle this, or the way I normally handle this, is of course check if it's signed. Of course, if it's not signed, you can create an exception with a path rule or a hash rule. The clue I want to show you is that I want you to, instead of allowing this for everyone, I would strongly recommend that you use a group. Let's see, let's create a group first. So let's just pretend that we have an accounting group. This. And then we go into the group policy, browse under security settings and application control policies, under the executable section. Then I'm creating a new rule. I'm allowing it, and I'm selecting a group here instead of everyone. That way you can actually limit who can actually have this exception. That's a good idea. So let's do a path. Like this. So that means that if you're a member of this group, you're allowed to place any binary under this specific path and execute it. So my point is that it's better to create an exception for a group than an exception for everyone. So you can limit the danger of it. All right. That's it. Let's switch back to PowerPoint. Or let me check if there's any questions before I exit out. Let's see. What's the best approach for GoToMeeting or similar apps? So if they are signed, I would definitely go with publisher rules. That's the rule of thumb. Always go with publisher first. If that's not possible, consider if you can use a hash rule. If it's updated frequently, that's kind of hard. Then you basically just have to go with the path rule, unfortunately. Okay, you already answered that. If not signed, yeah, okay. Can we create exception based upon user or groups of user instead of PC? I believe actually it is by users. If I said computers, I'm sorry. Let's see, user or group. So that basically means you specify the users and not the computers. And that means if you have users jumping from box or computer to computer, the AppLocker policy is persistence across the different computers for that user or that group of users. So that's the idea there. All right, let's see. Yeah, so the exception applies to users or groups of users. That's right. Let's see. What happens? Let me go a little bit. What happens when a published certificate is spoofed? It gets blocked because it checks the chain, and it checks that it's valid. Of course, if you are an admin, you can make Windows believe it's a legit certificate. So I know the recent vulnerability where the NSA found a bug in the oh my god, in the DLL file in Windows that handles the digital signatures. You could actually use that to bypass AppLocker. I know that's true. Yeah, you can also make rules based off of the web logs using PowerShell. Yeah, that's really helpful. I totally agree. You can use a PowerShell script to collect the logs and create automatically rules based on that. That's really cool. Is it possible to populate all the AppLocker rules that apply to normal user from that user context, or do you have to check from an admin context? So I have a script. I will cover that in part 2, but it's possible to check the rules as a normal user. Okay, I'll give you a little peek behind the curtains. So when a group policy is applied, it is actually stored in the registry as an XML file under, let's see if I can remember the path. It's software, policies, Microsoft, Windows, oh my god, SRPv2, there we go. So every time an AppLocker policy is applied, from a GPO standpoint, everything gets written to registry. So as a normal user, you can definitely export this. This is just XML, and you can view it if you want to. If that answers your question. All right. Anything on certificate spoofing? You know what? I'll add I'll add that attack to part 2, since there has been so many questions about that. Are the performance issues using? No, that's a good question. I have, as I said, I have seen performance issues in some edge cases, but normally that's not a problem at all. I think this was like a warning they wrote when they deployed this for Windows 7. Back then we didn't have that strong computers, so that's probably the reason why they have that warning. Yeah, AppLocker can definitely be integrated with SCCM. SCCM has something called a managed installer that you can use, meaning that when you deploy software from SCCM, you can make it so that everything deployed from SCCM is automatically whitelisted. That's also something you can do. All right, let me quickly switch over to PowerPoint again. But of course, it's important for me to tell you that this is not bulletproof. There are a lot of bypasses out there. But my opinion is that it's better to have something than nothing. I mean, it can really block stuff, and it can make it more difficult for attackers to actually do stuff on your boxes if you implement a basic rule set with AppLocker. I have an example list of different bypasses that you can have a look at on GitHub. Part 2 of the webinar will cover the bypasses a little more in detail, a little more in depth, and I will also make sure to include a certificate spoofing attack just to show you how that works. And as I said, if you do what we did today, you will probably stop most automated malware out there just by having a simple rule set. Here are the links to different sources. In terms of the event forwarding, Jessica Payne from Microsoft has a great blog post. She also has a good talk at Ignite in Australia. The official AppLocker documentation is also great to have a look at. I also have a blog with some AppLocker content. The Windows Defender thing I told you briefly about, that was an issue. There's a link there detailing how you should whitelist Windows Defender from now on. AppLocker is something I mentioned as well. If you are starting out with AppLocker, that's something I would choose to use my time on instead of doing too much manually to start out. Because AppLocker is really good written. It handles a lot of the bypasses, and it handles all these rare edge cases with GoToMeeting or whatever. So it's really good. Let's see. So that's basically it. Are there any more questions before I round this off?
Oddvar, there was just a few from the question sections. I copied them over, and a few more are coming in.
Okay. Are those in the? Oh, I'm looking at the answered ones.
Oh, sorry, they're in the chat as well now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I've been looking at the chat and the question and answers. Let's see. Let's start a little higher up. Can AppLocker integrate SCCM? That's where I left off. What is the best approach for GoToMeeting or similar apps? And as Emmanuel says here, if it's signed, you should do that. I would also argue that it's perfectly fine calling a software vendor, telling them to get their hands dirty and digitally sign their software. It's more serious, it's more professional, it's something you should do. So that's something you can tell the vendors if they don't have a digital signature on their binary files. Yeah, Emmanuel as well. If it's not signed, I wouldn't trust it as a matter of principle, and I I can agree. Yeah, can we create exception based on user? That's already been answered. Link on part 2. Yeah, so part 2, those of you who have registered for this webinar will automatically get an email with a link to part 2. Yeah, and we'll make sure to include links to this webinar is recorded, so we'll make sure to include a link there as well. If not, you can find it on our webpage. Let's see. Oh, there's more questions. For large enterprises, is there a way to whitelist all files currently in the environment? Would you recommend this as a way to get started? All files. Well, I would, as I said, I would start out by collecting or auditing the environment first to get a grasp of how it looks, the lay of the land, so to speak. And then I would start to pull in binaries and start to create the rule set. But there isn't a easy fix unless you have everything centralized. If you have a deployment solution where you can actually deploy all software to an endpoint, you could basically automate the entire process if you want to. And that's what AppLocker does, basically. So if you have processes around all the software, you could do it. If you have to do it manually, you basically just have to deploy an audit policy or get inventory data from some other system to figure out what sort of software you have running out there. All right. What are you using regards removing admin? What are you? Okay, so do you think of how do I manage it, or? Yeah, I'm guessing that. So what I normally do, are you thinking of permissions or Could you extend what you were asking, Mark? What you were thinking? Oh yeah, okay. So what I would strongly do advise you to do is to get sorry for laughing. Emmanuel is helping me answering here. Yeah, just get rid of the admins. But it can be hard. But again, if a user is an admin on an endpoint, he controls the endpoint. That's basically my point of view. So what I would recommend is to go down that long road of starting to remove admin rights. And while you're doing that, you will notice that in most cases, they don't even need admin rights. The biggest problem I see these days are software that needs to be installed. So that needs to be handled. And also different devices. There are different group policies you can set for that to handle installation of drivers, etc. So there are workarounds or fixes for handling the issues you have with removing admin privs for the users. Yeah. Once you are an admin, there's no way. Okay, that's not a question. All right. Let's see. I think we're done. If there's any more questions, you can reach out to us on Twitter or me directly on Twitter or send us an email or yeah.
Excellent. Oddvar, thank you so much for a great review here. And we look forward to seeing everyone part 2 on January 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And appreciate your time and thanks again for joining. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.